when you approach things either consciously or unconsciously from a perspective of, well, of course, the sign out front of my distribution center has the same logo on it that the wood does. Well, surely we're going to offer that. We're going to distribute it. Well, no, not if we aren't adding some kind of value for somebody.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Bradley Hartman. This episode is brought to you by Paradigm Estimate, a technology-driven takeoff service that gives you the speed, accuracy, and consistency it takes to win more bids. Spend less time on tedious takeoffs and more time on what counts the most, growing your business. Check out Paradigm Estimate at myparadigm.com/Bradley. That's right. My own name right there at the end of the URL. That is myparadigm, myparadigm.com/Bradley. I'm excited to bring to you today my conversation with Mr. Ross Theilen. He's the Vice President of Distribution at Weyerhaeuser. A few months back, I had the opportunity to spend some time with Ross and was really impressed with his knowledge on a couple really big themes that affect everybody in the industry. And we're talking about innovation and how we're evaluating risk and how we build business cases to change our own organizations in ways that are small and large. And also Weyerhaeuser, just the name, brand, and the legacy of what they have done to quite literally build our industry going back to the middle of the 19th century. I was interested to talk to him more about where distribution sits, how they deliver value, not only to the dealer, but also to the vendor, and the pros and cons of working with such a large company that has the manufacturing capabilities that Weyerhaeuser does. We also talk about recruiting talent and developing talent, and maybe most importantly, we talk about this idea of entitlement that I promise you will have you thinking differently about the term. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Ross Theilen, Vice President of Distribution at Weyerhaeuser. As always, thank you for listening. Mr. Ross Theilen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Excited to have you here. We're going to go back in the Wayback Machine to get us started here. I want you to flash back to, call it 6th grade, 12 years old, roughly. If you can tell me, maybe where were you and what were you into? What were you excited about in the 12-year-old Ross's body?
Wow. 12 years old. So I was Houston, Texas, Clifton Middle School, baseball and soccer were what I was into at that point.
And how many siblings did you have?
2 sisters. I'm the middle child. So 3 of us and a sister older and younger.
All right. And what did your parents do?
So my mom stayed home, really involved in our school and in supporting the education system, whatever that happened to be, wherever those schools were and what we were up to. My dad is a chemical engineer by training, worked for Shell Chemical Company his whole life there in Houston till he retired.
And was that engineering mindset that obviously your father had, you majored in, what would you major in at Texas A&M? Agricultural engineering?
Yes.
You did. Okay. Was this part of the Theilen DNA, or was there some nurture aspect that you grew up in a family that was thinking like engineers, or was it more nature or nurture?
Well, probably the facts that would support the conclusion here. Me and both sisters are engineers, all engineers, kids. So whether that's nature, nurture, or combination, my mom's probably the one that was thinking, how did I end up with, she was a social worker and a teaching degree from Southwest Texas State, I think. So the rest of us, I think even the cats were probably engineers.
Oh, well, as you know, in our industry, having an engineering mindset of being methodical, of pursuing consistent problems in a methodical way with a consistent thought process is extremely valuable. So I'm sure you've gone over that, but that certainly says something that, dad and the three siblings are all engineers for sure.
I'll just tell you, I've also realized the limitations of that. And the person that reminds me of that the most is my wife. And throughout our marriage, we've talked, well, how long is it going to take us to get from Nashville back to Texas for the holidays? She spits out an answer, and I just kind of scoff at it. About 2 minutes later, I've calculated, and she was right. So there's some times when, you do not need to calculate things down to the nth degree.
Yes, that's for sure. Well, I want to jump into something that since you said it, and we spoke, I don't know whether that was 60 or 90 days ago, you had this phrase that immediately just put me back in my chair and had me thinking about the context in which you said it and what you meant from it. And it was initially, I think you prefaced it by saying, hey, when we get together, I want to talk about entitlement. And I said, okay. And I was wondering, when I hear this phrase most often, my assumption kind of jumps to, we're bringing in younger talent, we're recruiting more talent out of schools, and kids in their early 20s, they feel entitled. And you immediately dispelled that when you said this phrase, or I might be paraphrasing, so we can fact check this, but Ross, you said something to the effect of, we in Weyerhaeuser distribution, we are not entitled to distribute Weyerhaeuser products. And that was jarring for me. So maybe go into a little bit more of the context there and what you mean when you say this to your team or you say it to someone on the outside like me.
Yeah. We have to earn it. And to me, when you approach things either consciously or unconsciously from a perspective of, well, of course, the sign out front of my distribution center has the same logo on it that the wood does. Well, surely we're going to offer that. We're going to distribute it. Well, no, not if we aren't adding some kind of value for somebody. And so, as much as I hate to say it, if somebody down the street who distributes for another brand, if they do it better than we do, why should we be entitled to distribute it? We have to bring some value in order to retain that right. And there's also cases that just to put it out there, where we have customers that are large enough that there's certain pieces of business they do. They do not need distribution for X, Y, or Z. We aren't entitled to our own company produced products.
As you say that, what sort of reaction have you gotten from your team? Either supporting that, hell yeah, Ross, I'm with you. I think about the same thing at night when I'm lying in my bed at night. Or I'm sure some people, when you say that, like their mouth drops, like hold the phone. Because I don't know, I don't think it's an illogical conclusion. You do have the same logo.
So I think, and look, part of what I'm doing is probably a bit for shock value, but I think when you get past that, so now I have your attention. Let's talk about, what do I really mean? What I really mean is, if we see an opportunity to distribute more OSB that produced from our mills, or to get into MDF or some other product line that we produce today but don't distribute a lot of, let's talk about what kind of customer need we can serve. Let's not talk about transfer price or why it ought to go through us. And so I actually feel like my team has been receptive to that. And frankly, the bigger piece is, I want my internal customers, my internal vendors, my suppliers, I want them to see that we're hungry and we're working hard to actually prove our value. So I think in the across the scope of it all, it's a good thing, but it does probably create a little bit of uncomfortableness at the outset.
I found this word value and our tagline. It's on, 10 different versions of the hat I have. It's on hanging on a 2 by 3 foot sign back over here. It's on a couple different dad vests I wear often. It says, "You are owed nothing, deliver value first." And everyone's like, yes, I love that. Deliver value first. Yet when we find working with our clients or even with our internal team, putting our finger on how exactly do we deliver just value that people expect or unique value, for a lot of folks, it's really hard to articulate this really well, especially when you say, vis-a-vis our competition. You mentioned something about delivering the value consistently to not only the dealer, but also the vendor. Maybe can you tell me, over the course of your career, maybe you look back over the last 5 or 10 years, how has that value changed that you deliver? And maybe let's break this apart, because I think it's really important to remember not only it's your customers, but downstream, i.e. dealers, but also your vendors, and how do you deliver value for them? So maybe let's think of our dealer community. What are you guys doing differently to really deliver that value?
So for dealers, it's crazy. We almost need a timestamp on this podcast because what season are we in? 2 years ago, you and I could say 1, 2, 3 and shout out the answer, and we would both say product availability. The value I can bring to you is consistent, guaranteed supply. Very few people guarantee is not a word we heard much over the last 2 or 3 years. Really tough to say that with a straight face and deliver on it. But that's what people value. Guess what they value today? It's not the same. We're having conversations with customers that the value they're looking for is, I want to keep my inventories low in my dealer yard because the marketplace is just uncertain. I don't want to miss business, but I don't want to be stuck carrying a bunch of inventory, having capital tied up in that. So I need a competitive solution from distribution to serve me just in time. But wait a second, you have the scale to buy direct. Yeah, and I'm going to buy some direct, but I also don't want to be fully direct because it's a rail car volume that's 3 times bigger than a truck and even bigger than that when it comes to job specific. That just in time at a competitive price is today's answer, I think.
I think that question you just posed to me is, what season are we in? And I think too often, whether it's a contractor, whether it's a salesperson, or in some cases it's executives, sometimes we lose, I think, perspective or just how big of a dynamic industry we are in and how quickly things change. And when we think, hey, I just talked to this guy a month ago, well, depending on where we are, what season we're in, to your point, a lot of things could have changed. Therefore, I think we're all trying to look for smart people who can help us, but I couldn't agree more. So that's a little bit on the dealer side. And I agree, we're having lots of discussions about, hey, what are our buying options and what does that look like in terms of just our potential, expense to acquire the material and what we could sell it for. Also, the opportunity cost that comes up. If we put a ton of money into this, that means we're going to have less money for something else. Talk about vendors a little bit, because obviously distribution has to really make a compelling case where a vendor comes and says, I got to be working with you guys on distribution. What does that look like?
So to me, when I think about how we show up for a vendor or supplier, is it's not the last mile. So let me be clear about that. I think that the dealer network is serving that final delivery in a way that, as a distributor, I'm not even set up to do, nor do I don't have the skill set that our dealer customers have. So we're in the middle, and the manufacturer needs a place to bridge the gap between the manufacturing facility and the end user or the dealer. So there's the obvious thing that we bring is, do we have the footprint to do it? Are we nationwide in major markets? Are we willing to carry? Do we have the financial strength to carry the capital. This stuff, I think about something as simple as building a deck, where 15 years ago there was a couple of different species of wood, and now there's multiple species of wood, and there's 35 different color and profile combinations in composite decking. That is a huge amount of complexity to translate into the marketplace. And so to me, as a distributor, what we're bringing to a vendor is, let me help you personalize your message so that it doesn't feel complicated, it doesn't feel overwhelming, and it fits in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we know how it fits in eastern and western Pennsylvania as well. And it's the same product. We have national literature and other marketing materials that you've provided me that we deploy, but the way we carry those into the market needs to be unique and specific to what that market demands.
How have you guys adjusted to just the sheer complexity of available products? Because I feel at every step of the way, whether you're going to a subcontractor or a remodeler GC or new home builder, up to a dealer, up to distributor, there just seems to be an ever increasing amount of new product and new combinations and new technology that comes in. What have you guys done to, maybe just within your own team, you describe some of the value you bring on the vendor side, but to just simplify that? Because part of this is just kind of this tyranny of choice. There are so many choices that people are like, my gosh, I really got to think about this. Well, the speed of industry today, we don't have a whole lot of time to make those decisions.
Well, there's so many ways. I mean, part of me wants to say, I don't know, Bradley, but that's probably not appropriate on a podcast where I'm supposed to come across as an expert. So the honest answer to me, the way you cut through all the noise, is I want to start with, tell me what the builder wants. What kind of problems are they trying to solve? And the idea that everyone has the exact same problems just isn't true. Now, the challenge is, look for common problems that enough people have that we can afford to invest in a solution that scratches that itch. But I like that angle, so that it's a problem searching for a solution instead of 50 new ideas searching for someone that might want them.
See what happened there? I posed a question. You started with, I don't know. And then you gave a really wonderful example. And I forget, I just said this the other day. I said, I was talking to a client. I said, I got to be honest. The way we're approaching this seems like we have a solution in search of a problem. I'm like, there's so many known problems in construction in general. Let's pick one of those and work backwards. But I think you're right. And that's starting with, let me ask some questions. Let me listen. Let me synthesize, and let me give you a range of alternatives that I think can solve that problem. I think if you can do that well, you're going to find a way to be in business and help people. I do want to ask you about maybe kind of the pros and cons, or some of the opportunities and challenges that come with a company like Weyerhaeuser, right? You got manufacturing, you got distribution, incredible legacy, name brand recognition. And on one hand, who would be better to come with some kind of really thorny problems that might have some different angles when you have the capability throughout the channel? On the other hand, I also know there's probably some challenges that come with having such a big, in some cases, unwieldy organization on how we get alignment to help me. How do you navigate that? And what have you learned in your career, 27 years with Weyerhaeuser? What have you learned about aligning those resources to really deliver some maximum impact? So
I think of it from two extremes. And there's value on both of those. On the one hand, I'm going to start, I don't like to do this, normally start with the customer, but I'm going to force myself to start the opposite end, at the stump, at the seedling in the tree. We're growing, I think largest private landowner in maybe North America, but significant land holdings that are constantly built. While you and I are talking, those trees are growing. And when we go to bed at night, they're going to keep growing. That is a huge and significant asset base that this industry relies upon. And we believe we have a positive outlook. They'll rely on that resource base for a long time to come. And then those manufacturing assets that we've got are reliably pumping out materials on spec, reliably available to our customers. That's the power to me of the big W, the big organization. So that's the positive piece of that. On the flip side, at the customer level, the way we want to show up, and what I've figured out or believe is really critical, is don't show up as this big behemoth who thinks that, well, the industry says that housing starts are down, so you must be slow. So I'm going to assume you're slow and come at you with ideas. Well, maybe you serve custom home builders who are as busy as ever with cash clients. Don't assume that every single customer fits what the Wall Street Journal or the Denver Post says is the trends of the day. So showing up with an ear instead of a mouth and listening to what the issues are, as if a big company, not if, when a big company like ours shows up that way, to me, you get the best of both worlds. And that's the cool thing to me about having distribution is forced to be local. And when you're local and your expense statement is measured in miles expensed in your car, not airline ticket expenses, you're there. And we may not be there enough, but we're there to listen and translate so that the big investments in trees and capital equipment can actually deliver something uniquely valuable to the person, to that dealer and that builder.
I know a lot of companies, clients we work with, our own team, which is small, we often struggle with just internal communication, how an insight over here is shared with a person who could benefit from it over here. What have you learned about leading a team that you got OSB, you got Truss Joist, you got Softwood Lumber? Obviously, you've got your own distribution team with a ton of talent, a lot of people. You got manufacturing over here. What have you learned about leading teams that communicate well and are open to sharing insights about customers or developments or anything else?
I'll start. My mind immediately goes to the negative. What do you need to avoid? What poisons the well? Internal competition poisons the well. Distrust poisons the well. Us versus them kind of mentality poisons the well. So avoid those at all costs. And so how do we do that? Well, you build relationships. You also move people from one type of opportunity to another. Before I took on the accountability for our distribution business, I was vice president of sales and marketing for Weyerhaeuser. That was the mill side. So it's hard to sit in a meeting and if every now and then, I know this is hard to believe, but there might be a comment or two in a small group that disparages the another part of the business. Oh, I don't understand why, but well, I used to be there. Let me come at it from another angle because so I think the biggest piece is assume noble intent and that they're doing their best. They want to serve the customer. And then let's keep talking. And if we're talking and we understand one another, we're going to avoid us versus them. We're going to minimize the chance for distrust. And we're going to look for common solutions that just make sense for the customer. And then if they make sense for the customer, they ultimately are going to make sense for the company as well.
I love that phrase, that assume noble intent. We're hiring good people. Most people are trying to do a good job and want to serve, their customers and be a good teammate. Yeah, on a large enough scale and in the world and wherever we are, there's going to be some people that are nefarious. Most of the times it's not. It's just people are trying and we're not communicating enough. So I love that idea. You mentioned one thing just about innovation and sometimes I think about distribution. I've been in some organizations that specialize in distribution. And I think, I don't know exactly what's going on here. I'm far from an expert, but just watching how people do stuff, I think there's got to be some ways to innovate. And you were talking about really challenging your team, and you kind of referenced I'm assuming this is real, like an industrial sized Roomba that would move dumpsters to make it more economical and more efficient to do things. How do you think about innovation and risk in distribution and with an organization as big and with as many resources as Weyerhaeuser has, but also understanding with innovation comes some risk, because sometimes things don't always work out. And some people might think, I'm not sure if really pushing forward on this innovation is really worth it for my career or my own trajectory.
So that's interesting. So I'll talk about innovation in just a second, more specifically. But the risk element of that, where my mind goes first is absolutely full stop. Number one risk I want to avoid is getting someone physically injured or hurt. So, the idea that, and to me, it comes up with self-driving cars. Any news story where a self-driving car bumps into somebody is going to make headlines, and it should. We're all worried and concerned about that. Innovation in a distribution setting is first and foremost concern is we're not going to experiment on such an edge that it puts anybody physically in danger. And some people might say, come on, Ross, is there really that kind of risk? It's a warehouse and a yard. But there's rolling stock equipment that is always going to beat the human. It's going to win. And it's not going to, that's not just hypothetical. It happens. So that's honestly the risk I worry about. The risk to career, the risk to finances, those are overcomable. And I frankly think there's greater risk if we aren't thinking about how to evolve our whole industry, frankly, not just your local warehouse and distribution center, but evolving the whole industry. Someone with less stake in the status quo will come in and disrupt it for us. So we may as well be thinking about how we do that. The cool thing, so I think the risk is minimal there. The other thing that minimizes it for Weyerhaeuser specifically is our distribution business is part of a larger organization. Back to the benefit of the bigger company, we're innovating and automating in our manufacturing facilities all the time. We're innovating in the woods all the time. So we have people who are their paycheck, and we don't have one person, we got dozens of people whose paycheck is based upon automation and innovation. I just need a little bit of their time at the distribution center to come in and tell me, what am I missing? I can do that. And we are doing that. And so that also minimizes my risk versus being like an independent distributor, where I think my option would be really to hire outside consultancy to do it. So that's helpful. And I really, honestly, I don't worry about the risk career-wise or monetary. It's really about people is the risk I care about the most.
As you think about innovation kind of here, the second half of 2023, say the near term, 2024, 2025, is innovative thinking and kind of frameworks or steps to do that, to go from, hey, here's an idea, to here's a business case where we can see, kind of a range of an ROI or, best case, worst case scenario, if we were to go down this and there's a budget and there's a timeline. Are these things that you would generally model to show like, hey, from the executive level, here's the way we're doing this? Or can this be something that is pushed down to where it's part of your training? And I'm sure you guys have a training university or library or something. Is that something that you can get really methodical about infusing the whole organization through education?
So we're actually, you've really well described the journey that we've been on for a number of years now. We're trying to create an innovative culture where our forklift operators at distribution centers, they have ideas. They're talking about them. Sometimes they come out in, hey, what if we? And sometimes they come out in, I can't believe we still fill in the blank. Turning those into ideas and solutions. We have a platform that everybody has access to. We call it Cutting Edge. And you put your idea in there. Some of those are ideas that are, here's my problem. And then other people can chime in with, well, have you thought about this? Have you? And others are, I've got a solution. And sometimes it's a solution I've already implemented. And then we track metrics like replication. Well, this worked in Dallas. How many of the 19 distribution sites, who else has this issue and can replicate what they did in Dallas to solve that problem?
I'm going to nerd out here just a little bit. I'd like to go a little bit deeper. Tell me a little bit more about this replication like metric. Are you setting goals for that? And
Yes.
just curious about what's the volume? What is maybe just give me an example. Don't give me the secret sauce. I don't want you, bringing down the stock price because you shared it with me, but I'm curious, maybe, give me an idea of kind of the volume and what that might look like, or maybe just a generalized example or specific if you can.
So how it would work is we'll go with the Dallas example. They've had an issue with bad drops. So on 60-foot engineered wood products, we cut them to customer length. You end up with something 18 inches deep and 3 feet long. It's probably not going to sell. So, and if you do enough of that, you generate a fair amount of waste. So they come up with an idea that makes that better, that reduces waste or finds a home for 18-inch deep product, 3 feet long. So, hey, we've solved it. We've posted this to Cutting Edge. Our challenge to the other sites is, look, you don't, if this is not an itch you've got, you don't need to scratch it with Dallas's idea. But more often than not, we're all facing very similar issues. Who else is having that problem? Take a piece of it. And if you do replicate it, then I want you to basically log the fact that you replicated that. And we believe that there's more than one replication a year that's possible and practical. So that's what we're tracking is number of replications per year. First of all, the idea has to get into the system to begin with. And then once it is, how many of someone else's idea did you go and implement? Because that's actually, not invented here syndrome is prevalent across a lot of industries, and we're not immune to it ourselves.
So if I'm in the Northeast, this happens in Dallas, this goes into Cutting Edge, by the way. Love the double entendre there. Very smart. I like it. How do I get alerted to this? Basically, there's an insight. We've solved this problem. Y'all out there probably have something similar. How does that get on my radar? If I'm busy, I'm doing my own thing. How does that come across?
So I break it down into two, just like any communication, you can push it or you can let people pull it. And we have both options. We've got multiple layers of opportunity to push this kind of info out, which, and I think that's okay. And it's helpful. It's necessary, but I'll do it on a quarterly town hall call with all of our distribution teams. Our site operations managers have monthly calls, I believe, where they'll highlight some innovations. So there's a couple of ideas on push. And we also, by the way, we also will highlight innovations. We have on our company intranet, we have a what's hot widget, for lack of a better. And so these ideas that are getting a lot of attention on Cutting Edge are showing up in a what's hot widget for folks to look at. So those are all kind of push. The pull mechanism is we're encouraging folks to take 10 minutes a week, take a bit of time every week, just go in and snoop around, look in Cutting Edge and you're just absorbing what you see. And maybe you're going in because I've got this problem. Let me see if somebody's solved it. That's cool too. But even if you're not cognizant of a current problem and you just want to see what other people are innovating on, go into the tool and look around. And that pull, to me, when we've established and maintained the culture where people are motivated to do that, that's the best way.
Yeah, that like scheduling of curiosity, of at least being curious about our own business. And what I've kind of found anecdotally is if I'm just surveying what other people are doing, and again, if you look at what you guys are doing versus a dealer, a lot of the processes are somewhat similar. It's scale, right? And maybe it's a larger, smaller, number of SKUs. But I often found, as you and I are trying to figure out how what you're doing in Dallas and I'm doing in, Newark, I'm also like, dude, this could also be generalized 10% and should go out to every one of our salespeople or our DSRs to talk to our dealers. Our dealers are struggling with this exact same thing because a lot of these issues they're kind of human beings get together and how we decide to institute some teamwork. But I love that. So I'm glad I asked. I appreciate you entertaining my questions, going a little bit deeper on there, but I love that idea. And also I think it's smart. And I would just ask, was this something you guys are doing on your own? Are you guys also investing in some lean thinking and teaching? But this idea of kind of pushing versus pulling, I've heard just more of that come out, mainly from kind of residential home builders, commercial builders, who guys are talking about kind of some of these lean principles.
So we do have a lean training and capability expectation within our company. We'll do green belt training for people that are interested in it. I would say this year, we're not specifically targeting a certain number of Kaizen events or lean events by site, but we have a pretty good collection of folks that have been through that lean green belt, apply it in their business routinely. And to me, a complementary skill set to the innovative culture that we're trying to build, regardless of whether you've been formerly lean trained or not.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I just think it's, if we're trying to do something, whether it's, take out the garbage cans to change the new processes, we can either remove something that's making this slower, remove that and we'll go faster, or we can put some weight behind it to go downhill and get some wind at our back to make it easier. And I think just that distinction of the way you articulated that immediately says, oh, okay, there's probably more options or alternatives to how we choose about doing this better. And I think that just immediately improves the thinking that goes behind it. So let me ask you, as I look at your career, and again, you're going on 27 years with Weyerhaeuser, both locations, right? Arkansas, Colorado, Louisiana, now in the Pacific Northwest, market development engineer, just the way that it appears on paper, you can give me your context here, of put in different positions, management, leadership, working on the manufacturing side in the mill, then working in distribution. Is it possible to continue to build careers like this with the talent that you see that's coming out from universities right now and the people that you're recruiting?
I think it absolutely is. I think we have to also we have to be open and accepting to the idea that not everybody's going to be from day one, be with us through year 27. And that's okay too. I mean, I still remember one of my first two job interviews, Weyerhaeuser and one other company. The other company, one of their comments was, man, do you think you're willing to stay here a while? Because we're having trouble keeping people. And I thought, well, I don't, you can tell I did not choose to go there. We all have that problem. Now that was an engineering manager doing some hiring that needed some help with their marketing skills. So we have to be open to that. And I'm not going to begrudge you if your time with me is now coming to an end for now. But I also believe, especially in some of these communities where we operate, and this is another example, Bradley, where we paint stuff with a broad brush. Well, people don't stay in jobs. Well, how about in Natchitoches, Louisiana, where we have people with multiple years of tenure tied to the community? They do want to stay. Our opportunity, by the way, I think it's sometimes a cop-out. Maybe they don't want to stay because we didn't treat them the way they ought to be treated. So let's aspire to treating them really well, having a great work environment. And in some communities that there's a tie to being there, let's leverage that. Oh, by the way, there's other roles in communities where the workforce is extremely mobile and they're going to turn over. And that's okay too. But I do think it's absolutely possible, even in a day and age where there's a lot of people are not really necessarily conditioned to stay at the same place for 20, 30 years.
Yeah. My belief is, I got a 16-year-old and we work with some partners that are in their early 20s. Yeah, people are different. However, I don't think human nature changes that much. And if they're challenged, they like who they're working with, they like their boss, you pay them well, and dare I say it, there's an element of fun that comes to it, not all the time. People are going to be self-interested. People are going to want to stay in those jobs. And I don't think it's kids these days are different. No, we've been saying that for, 40,000 years. And I will hear people say, I've read more articles that they're like, what you don't understand is the young people today, they don't want jobs. They want experiences. And I'm like, all right, I know that sounds like a headline. I mean, I need to unpack that. But if I look at your career, I feel it appears there's a whole bunch of both regionally, from a geography standpoint, you've moved around, but you were also doing different things. I'm like, I think you, Ross, sounds like you've had some really great experiences at different places. And I'm sure all of those really come together to help you in a leadership role today.
Well, thank goodness, frankly, for Weyerhaeuser giving me those opportunities, and for the bosses, the managers, and the leaders that gave me the chance. Because I'll tell you, some of those jobs, I probably took more than I gave. How many jobs? I mean, if I'm hired on the outside, unless they're desperate, they want somebody that knows what they're doing. I'm not saying that makes it sound like I didn't know what I was doing, which
It does,
I
yes.
feel like I was competent to perform every job I've had the opportunity to do. But you do learn more in some roles, and being surrounded by folks that can support you, and to me is helped me gain those experiences without ever changing the logo on the paycheck over 27 years.
I know exactly what you mean. I want to make sure, some of the people that you report to, like, I listened to Ross's podcast and pretty sure he's still taking more than giving. We need to make a change here. This was revealed to an audience of millions and millions of people, as far as we know. No, I know what you mean, because we'll have those too, where, we have an engagement with the client and, hey, I think we performed, I think we delivered value, we strengthened the relationship. And there'll just be, a situation or one or two things where I'm like, that experience changed my life. And I got that by working with them. So I know exactly what you mean about just, this give and take. There's so many places and situations to learn from as we go. Before we go, I want to ask you about I don't know if you describe yourself this way, but I do. I'm a book nerd. I write a lot. Therefore, I feel it's really important that I read a lot and read kind of high quality stuff to hopefully improve what I'm doing. But you've talked about your interest in reading historical nonfiction. You told a great story just about World War II and something that happened and drawing that into what was happening in a current situation. And I just feel that might not be directly multidisciplinary thinking, but if it's not, it's close. And it's kind of taking this thing out here and telling a story and saying, the root of this or the principle is exactly what we're dealing with here, whether it's management or leadership or dealing with other people, whatever it is. Maybe tell me a little bit about what you're reading now, or maybe if there's a book you'd recommend and how you kind of got into that kind of reading habit.
So I'll start with the last part of the question, because the habit honestly ebbs and flows. So if my wife were joining me on this podcast, she would be shaking her head. Yeah, Ross wasn't reading for about 15 years of our marriage. With little kids, you're and a job, you're not doing a ton of that. Pandemic sparked additional reading. And the first bit was Jack Reacher novels by Lee Child. I read every single one of them. And now I'm trying to gift them somewhere because they're taking up
There's
a lot of space.
Yeah.
But those were fun. Not exactly attributable, not helping me be a better leader, but fun to read. And then I rekindled my interest in historical. It's not nonfiction, historical. The most recent book I read after Pegasus Bridge, which is, his name escapes me, from University of New Orleans, World War II author. I'm reading Citizen Soldiers by him. And the thing that's, to me, that's cool, I'm not a good writer, by the way. So part of it's just the fascination with how these authors are able to tell a compelling story in the written word, and weaving in stuff that people wrote in their diaries or letters home to girlfriends and moms. That's just really cool. And so I aspire to just get something from that piece of it. But then the other piece, and we can always massage the our recollection on the true events, but I think with history in particular, that's harder to make it fake. It's just like, wow, think about what these people were up against, planning for the invasion of France. They knew they were going into this, and for those folks, that ends up being the pinnacle of their lives. And they're less than 21 years old, a bunch of these. It's things like that are just, it really sucks me in. And then thinking about the fact that it's going to be hot here this weekend in Seattle's got me bummed out. But you know what? I think that's a little trivial compared to what these guys faced when they flew a engineless plane into the right up to the edge of a bridge.
Yeah, I agree. For me, I kind of get inspiration from it in that, whether it's history or love kind of World War II and understanding more just about that. Obviously, it's just so non-trivial to put it lightly. But also just, I recently kind of read, it was kind of an hour-long podcast describing James Dyson of the Dyson vacuum cleaner. This guy spent 15 years failing every single day to develop a better vacuum. And I'm sure we all have these moments where we're just like, dude, large and small ways, I'm just failing at this. And then you hear about, okay, this is relatively minor to like, this was his whole business. This was his life. This was his identity. I can get through this. And all of a sudden it kind of gives me like, hey, there's going to be peaks and troughs. Like, keep doing the work, chop wood, carry water, keep moving forward. Good things are going to happen. Would you recommend, I remember that is the story you had told. You kind of gave a little synopsis of Pegasus Bridge. If I was going to dive into, say, one of the most recent books you've had, or that second book, Citizen Soldier, what would you recommend? If I was going to dip my toe into here, some of the reading list for Ross Theilen, where would I start?
So I like Pegasus Bridge for the fact that it's short. It's a very focused story. I think World War II history can be overwhelming. And so when you're focused on one specific event, it feels it's a shallower pool to dip your toe in, but the water's still nice and warm and inviting. We'll put it that way.
Cool. Awesome. Well, hey.
Oh, sorry. One other real quick. If you're the one that's a little older now, but the Undaunted Courage, the story of Lewis and Clark's adventure, that's a longer book, but man, there's so much from that about how to persevere and dealing with the unknown and just thinking about how different that world was then versus the way it is now. That's a can't beat book as well.
Okay. Well, I'll dig into that. And actually that does scratch an itch for me. I read a book on kind of the history of the Comanches, and which was just fascinating. And I didn't know anything about it. And being in Texas, it helps to kind of understand some of that sort of context. But they talked about like around that same era, which was, dude, we're pushing west, whether you like it or not, Lewis and Clark and what they went through. And growing up, I feel like, whatever was fourth grade, social studies, it was like, they picked up Sacagawea and they had a good little trip and they went west. And then you realize, no, there was a lot of details in there that were life and death situation and some incredible acts of courage and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, that's it. So I'll pick up both those. But well, hey, Ross, I've learned a lot from talking to you. I would say learned a lot more just about distribution in general. I knew about it a little bit, but also I just think in leadership and the way that you're thinking and leading your team, I've learned a lot for myself. So I want to say thank you and appreciate you making time to come on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
All right then, friends, how did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Mr. Ross Theilen. If you did get value from that, please rate and review on whatever podcast player that you are listening to. That means more to us than you know. This episode is brought to you by Paradigm Estimate, a technology-driven takeoff service that gives you the speed, accuracy, and consistency it takes to win more bids. Spend less time on tedious takeoffs and more time on what counts the most, growing your business. Check out Paradigm Estimate at myparadigm.com/Bradley. Also, our goal here is to make this the best podcast you listen to. So if you have ideas for future guests or future topics, or maybe you're dealing with a gnarly little situation that you would like to delegate to somebody else and say, you know what? I don't know how to think about this or what to do next. I'm going to give it to you, Hartman. We call these little segments asking for a friend. And what we do is we take on the burden of the struggles that you have and we think about them. We run it by our internal team and some of the smartest people in our industry. And then we anonymize you, of course. And then we try to give you an answer back to solve your problem and hopefully help other people. So if you got one of those issues that you're dealing with, you can email me directly at bradley@bradleyhartmanandco.com. All right, then, friends, that's all I've got. I'm out. We're going to close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.